Perfect, thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm very glad to see you all here. Before I say anything, I need to inform you that this event is being recorded and it is also being live streamed. So I hope you are okay with that. And if not, then maybe you can turn off your camera or just watch us from the live stream. This event and the whole festival has been supported using public funds provided by Abacus Foundation, Slovak Arts Council, and the City of Prague. And this event is also part of the program track Shaping the Future Synthetic Realities. And so we have today here with us a visual artist and digital dreamer, Chris Core. Then we have Entangled Others. It's the shared studio practice of visual artist Felican McCormick and Sofia Crespo, and designer and curator Mary Ponomareva. And they all together created an AI-based work for the Zero Emissions by 2099 show, which was exhibited in a MAMA gallery in Rotterdam. And they will tell us more about this project and their practice, and together we will explore the potential of AI art for envisioning the future beyond utopia and dystopia binary. I have to say, I really liked the sentence in the event description that says, using algorithms to envision alternative realities can potentially be one of the tools to subvert the crisis of imagination. So that is something that's really exciting for me. So I'm really curious to hear more about this. And one last thing before I give the word to our speakers, I would like to also mention that you can ask questions. So you can ask questions here in Zoom, and those who are not with us in Zoom can ask questions on YouTube in the live chat, or on our Discord, where we have a dedicated text channel to this event. And this is also meant to be a place where you can talk later. After the event, you can meet all on Discord and continue the discussion. And this is all from my side. And now I'm giving word to Mary. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your introduction, Lenka, and for this possibility. And I'm going to share the screen and share a little bit context about the show Zero Emissions, which indeed was sort of like the hub that brought Chris and Entangled Others together in a sense by curation, because one of the part of the exhibition looks at how algorithm can sort of help to build new future worlds and future scenarios beyond the boundaries and the limits of our human imagination in some sense. As we are, in my opinion, sort of experiencing this like sort of imagination crisis, and there is a necessity to look beyond the cliche. So this exhibition presents some sort of future journey of the late Anthropocene, and you can navigate it both online and physically. Unfortunately, now the physical space is still closed because of the corona measures, but the show is still open online, so you can visit and see the work of Chris and the work of Entangled Others that was made together with Sofia Crespo. And so this Zero Emission show aims through the prism of technology untangle some certain relations which are political and personal, and envision the future in some ways, and propose the alternative visions. And how can we do that in a manner which is inclusive and open? So this exhibition is divided into three parts. The first part is the Sci-Fi Lab Cafe, which is reclaiming the state of utopia and techno-optimism that we have a better world ahead of us with the help of technology. And it sort of tries to yeah, I guess reclaim the future narrative that was made in the 70s, which has a lot of loading of extractionism and yeah, just having this human-centered vision. So what would be the role of ecology and humanity if it is reclaimed? Then we have the future in ICU, which is reclaiming the state of dystopia, when these failed expectations of sci-fi lab cafe have came to life. And the last state is AI temple, which is the state of yet unimagined, where together, like acquiring the critical tools, we can create something beyond the utopia and the dystopia binary. Yeah, so like as I said, it has a virtual showroom and online platform. This is the link, zero emissions by 2099. This is mama.nl. And you can explore the environment together with contributions by Chris and Entangled others with Sophia. And it was made by amazing developers, Luisa Teichmann and Noemi Biro. And these are just some sneak peeks from the exhibition, of the physical exhibition in Mama showroom, some different zones. And the last zone, AI Temple, made together with the scenographer Rosalie Vames. And yeah, for this event, I invited Entangled Others and Chris Core, and they're going to present the work Beneath the Neural Waves 1.1 and Amnesia. And what's interesting is that they both reappropriate the digital tools and the open source tools and the algorithm, but I feel like they both have a very different stance towards it. So it will be interesting to see. And yeah, thank you. I'm gonna give the word to Chris or to Filiekan.
Hello. Hi. Okay, I can start. Hello. Can someone hear me, or is it?
I can hear just fine.
Yes, it's working.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So, hi everyone. I'm Chris Core. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and speculative designer, and I'm very much interested in the exploration of an ever-changing mediated reality and sides of our technological nature. I'm presenting today a project, Amnesia, that is part of Zero Emissions by 2099, curated by Mary. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Okay, so the project Amnesia is focused on the concept of the human hybrid memory that can be augmented, modified, or influenced by AI. With this project, I wanted to prompt a discussion about evolving algorithms that can be trained on our online photos and can fill in the memory gaps by creating the fake memories that are plausible enough to be perceived as real. And I was very much driven by the way in which social media algorithms learn our online behavior, process the data, and recommend the relevant content with the cameras, with the built-in AI and advancements in the brain-computer interfaces. So we are basically beginning to explore a new technological sides of our nature. And by using the machine learning algorithms, we can overcome the boundaries of our understanding of what human consciousness is. So it consists out of two parts. The first one is a research theoretical based one. So I started doing it in 2019, and back then there was not much information about those things at all online. So I started contacting different professionals in the field of computational neuroscience, artists working with AI, different machine learning researchers, and also tech philosophers to talk about all these topics. And in the end, I compiled it into a sort of nonlinear interview site because all this information was crucial to hide. And basically, everything was swirling around the question, what will we remember if our memories can be gathered, classified, and augmented by AI? So you can saw it in amnesia.com website. I'll post the link in chat a bit later. And for the visual side of the project, I was sort of envisioning, like making my artistic vision about how AI can recall and fulfill the human memories. So it's a video artwork about hybrid memory creation, and it was made by the use of pre-trained big GAN model, GAN breeder app, and reverse Google image search. It consists out of 8 different memories, but I've built them by the same principle. I'm going to show you one of it so you can have a tiny understanding of what I'm talking about.
I remember a triceratops with a quail. I remember rock crab and a spoonbill, an American coot. I remember the bull mastiff and the toy poodle too. I remember cricket and a tiger beetle with the coho. I remember carousel in a grocery store and a clog. I remember a lawnmower and a harvester too. I remember holster in a mailbox. I remember a tank and a parachute too. I remember a lampshade, nails, and a rubber eraser. I remember the Model T and a pickup in front of a mosque. I remember zucchini and jackfruit in a hot pot. I remember the washer and a vending machine. I remember a pot pie and rapeseed in the Alps.
Okay, so in the beginning, AI tries to recall and visualize the memory driven by a human voice. Then it processes and generates the syntactic memory out of them. And afterwards, it goes back into the real data set of the photographic memory based on the previous visualizations. So that was basically the mechanism that I built those memories from. And to create these videos, I on purpose used only an open source tools available there. So main data set for it, it was collected, I believe, by researchers from Stanford University, and at the time it was the biggest one accessible. So it consists out of 14 million images and 1,000 categories of all of the different stuff that thinking that is those interesting to use because it can work as a collective memory because it was collected by different people and it can be more or less maybe more inclusive. The base images. Then you will see this mathematical collage. So everything you've heard before, all these categories, they all exist in this one image at the same time. So you can see here a sort of a flamingo and a planetarium and a church at the same time, because it's a kind of mathematical collage made with the GAN breeder app. It was created by Joel Simon. He was also part of the interview process. It was an amazing tool at that time, and it was also based by big GAN model and on the ImageNet as well. And the last part of the video goes And it actually was the most interesting to me in a way, because I take this generative image, an abstract one, and I've used the reverse Google image search. And then it gave me thousands of results of the real images that look identically, visually identically to the generative one. So that was an interesting thing to think about, where you fed the algorithm with another algorithmic image, and it gives you back the realistic images. And I was quite fascinated by all of these results. And to be honest, I didn't really expect that. That I can say that is the most interesting part for me about machine learning, that you can't really know what you're going to get in the end, this small unexpected thing. And talking about that, I can say that you also can't really control it. So for example, I've just recently finished my new project, Metamorphosis, iProduct, and it will be released in a couple of days. And for one of the visual part, I was training the GANs on a custom data sets of visual commercials and human portraits. There was a hybrids of that. And after I had to animate that with motion models, and some images went fine, some images were rejected, but some images produced a very uncanny and weird result to me that I can't really explain. So that was the one of those images that I got. And how did that happen? How did it go from that guy on the left to the thing on the right? I have no idea. I have no clue. And that was just fascinating and mind-blowing, to be honest. And I guess those small things, those small errors that happen, or maybe it's not even errors, but those uncanny things that happen in between algorithms, in between one that generates that and one that tries to recognize this and animates that. It's something that was quite weird and interesting. So to sum up that all, I can say that there are lots of different machine learning tools you can find out there, and a lot of them are open source tools. And I'm not a programmer myself, so I can't code from scratch, but I can say the designer can use those tools if she or he has the purpose to use them in a very interesting way. And such a small and just dumb tool as a reverse Google image search can work very well with your project and can produce very, very interesting results. Yeah, so thank you. I'm done speaking.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, it's fascinating to see like the whole sort of background picture of how you classify these data sets and how fantastically they create like this sort of parallel reality, which our brain sort of still is wired to associate as something we have experienced before. But then in a way you get this like deconstructed state, and this last project, it's extremely uncanny.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
It's almost like having this sort of evolution, but then throughout the feedback loops, getting this completely uncanny results.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree that what you've been talking about and wrote it in description, those tools can definitely brought up our artistic imagination for sure, because something out there happened then can't really happen in your brain. And when you see these things, you can think slightly different you can see things from a rather different angle. And that is very interesting about machine learning tools.
Yeah, I wanted to add that it's really interesting that what you showed, that we can use the reverse Google image tool to actually generate images for us. Like it resembled me Gauguin tool. So when you just draw a rough sketch and it tries to generate the image from it. So maybe if you would like you did, like the generated image that you put in a Google search looked very abstract or visually indeterminate. And then it got you like some real representation from this world. So that's really intriguing that, I was using Google, like reverse Google image search before, but not in this way. And now, like, once we have generative tools, you see like, okay, maybe we don't need them in every occasion, but they're inspiring us to even use some non-generative tools in new ways.
Yeah, I agree, totally.
Yeah. Thank you.
Guess it makes that my turn now. Hello, everyone. I'm Felican, one half of the Entangled Others studio. So I'm going to share a little bit about the project that me and Sophia have been working on, which is Beneath Neural Waves. Second. Let's see, why is this not working? Oh, so this is a project that we've been working on now for well over a year, which is all about exploring how can we dream up new ecosystems. Because when we work with generating artificial life, and the focus of our studio has been to explore how do we create representations and presence of nature in the digital space, and how can we use this to help us, both develop new connections to nature and to also explore how can artificial life and generative arts combined help us understand and see things in new ways. So when we first started this project, we looked at the concept of ecosystems and how they are communities of organisms or social ecosystems, really, wherein all the different living organisms and parts are constituted interact as a system. And how, even though these systems can be very small, like in the case of coral reef, which we landed upon in the end as our sort of like starting point to explore, we saw that even though coral reefs actually are very, very small, if you look at how much space they take up in the ocean and how much of the ocean can almost resemble a desert in its own way, but they were really quite vital, and they had long-reaching interactions around the globe. So for us, it was really a perfect sort of example of of interconnectedness, how it occurs in the natural world, but also how the whole of it emerges from the interweaving and the entanglement of all these different individual species. No one species can be said to be the coral reef. And at the same time, a coral reef is made up of corals, fish, and all these others. So without the components, you can't have the whole, but each component isn't the whole either. So we set about to explore how can we work with using machine learning techniques to create and dream up new ecosystems. And of course, a good question is like, why on earth would we even do this? There's plenty of beautiful coral reefs out there, and why on earth would we spend this time and energy attempting to bring them to life and to explore, new coral-like ecosystems in the digital space? Well, to start with the point of storytelling, the way we are working is that through generating these artificial life forms, by giving them space within the digital, we are, telling a story about ecosystems and about life. And to do so, we have to tell a story about what we know, what we believe in, but also a story naturally excludes what we don't know, the unknown. And in our case, that turned out to be a lot, because the available data for the marine world is actually, frighteningly small when you look at it. We could see very quickly that, for example, 3D models of corals, we looked, for research data sets, etc., online, from institutions. And even so, there are some institutions that actually, have, scanned 3D scanned parts of coral reefs and made this available online. In fact, most of that data is just like, down in the tens of specimens. So of course, this is not nearly enough to train a machine learning algorithm. So we actually had to ask a fellow artist, Joel Simon, to help us produce, using his knowledge of genetic algorithms, to generate additional coral species that could, help us actually, gain a sufficient amount of data to generate coral-esque data. And this is really quite fascinating as well, because this meant that this whole project, even though we, in the end, were able to generate quite, visually complex and interesting new specimens, both two-dimensional and three-dimensional, at the same time, they are very much a representation of the limits of our knowledge or our mundane world, in that, we could only use data that was actually available to us. And the amount of data we have of coral reefs is really quite fascinating, because a lot of it is, very, very limited to begin with, but it's also relatively homogeneous. There's a relatively sort of small subset of images and styles of images and focus points that are repeated. And for us, this is where it becomes really interesting working with machine learning, because we often use the term meditation, that to curate a data set is an act of meditation, wherein you meditate upon a subject. You take time with that subject and explore, how does that subject, what are my biases? What are my preferences? If we're making a data set of jellyfish, for example, am I automatically curating the images of jellyfish that I personally find beautiful and, visually appealing? And also, does that imply that there are ugly jellyfish out there? And through this act of curation, of meditating on a subject, you become, at least as an artist, more aware of your own visual biases and preferences and assumptions about an other, a more than human other, for example, jellyfish or coral. And this becomes really a valuable tool in exploring how can we become more aware of the other as, not as a non-human, not as something that isn't us, but something that is more than us, that we cannot understand how it is to be, but we can still, develop a more nuanced and empathetic relationship to. So as Mary has already shared, there's a sneak peek on the left here of one of the iterations of Beneath No Waves in the physical exhibition. And this, of course, this project is an ongoing project that we have now working in multiple iterations of, both physical and digital. And what we also find to be quite fascinating with this project, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more later, is when you're working within the digital space and translating that back into the physical space, you lose a lot of the very fascinating potential of working precisely with artificial life in the digital spaces. And that is that often, especially with sculptural works, it's hard to capture the same complexity of colors, of motion, of overlaying of contexts from the physical to the digital, which you cannot necessarily do in more traditional means. So what we found quite fascinating is that by using artificial life and machine learning, we could generate experiences and visual layers atop of the world, which allow the coral reefs, which are normally very inaccessible and perhaps should stay inaccessible to most of us, to still allow them to become part of our mundane everyday experiences. So that's just very, very briefly there. Thank you. Stop sharing now. And yeah, just a short bit on that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for such beautiful presentation. And I wonder, do you think that the curation done by an algorithm, just like with Google Images or Instagram or whatever platform, affects our perception of nature and maybe like predisposes certain preferences? Because like, I don't know, if you Google fish, you would get like only the beautiful ones, which are like predefined, shot on a really low ISO with a good camera.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's really kind of one of the core parts of this sort of project, has been exploring exactly that, because yes, when algorithms are based upon learning from people's preferences and, creating a feedback loop wherein you are confronted with more content that you find, somehow preferable or interesting or stimulating. And we see that a lot, for example, that what the algorithms then start to prioritize and produce, if you go on Instagram, for example, and look up the hashtag nature, you'll get about 70% or so humans in the pictures. And of course, humans are nature. However, it's quite interesting that there is sort of a focus upon the human face becomes, prominent in like the top results, rather than, for example, a picture completely not featuring humans. And this isn't to say that that is a negative thing, but what we see is that our mundane reality, our sort of like our sphere of experience, the mundane, is very much, quite monotonous, really, compared to the actual diversity of forms in life. And we experience that a lot when generating all these corals. And also earlier, we worked on a series, Artificial Remnants, with insects. And no matter how crazy or weird the output visually was, you could just, go watch a nature documentary or scroll through like, weird insect or deep sea researcher Twitter accounts and find specimens from the real world that are just so much wilder and so much more, unimaginable. And I think that's really quite fascinating, that if you're not actually going out there and sort of like experiencing the natural world, it always manages to surpass whatever we can generate from our sort of mundane sphere.
Yeah, I think it's also something that we have to really confront, like each of us on a personal level, because our reality is so much catered to us. Like even if you go to the supermarket, you have this like ideally shaped vegetables, which from the encyclopedia. But to be honest, like they're like so much just going to waste because it has like this sort of uncanny shape, but then it's like fitting outside of the standard, like a carrot with like 5 roots, for example. And I feel like the same sort of happens to nature, to corals. And
absolutely. And I think that it's really quite important to explore that. But I think also in the context of machine learning, I think one of the reasons it's very important for artists to explore machine learning is to precisely be able to actually dive into and, sort of like explore the limits of what these algorithms do and what these data sets provide. I mean, there was, I think a bit over a year ago now, a rather interesting sort of like scandal regarding ImageNet, for example. Excavating.ai, I think is the URL for that. And what was fascinating about that was that they did a review of this, benchmark data set, and they found that a lot of the tags and descriptions of the images, which are often used to help, sort out and help, for example, Big GAN generate something that's a cat versus a dog. But very often these could be quite biased to the point of being, quite negatively biased, unfortunately, like what makes an image of a person a criminal, for example, or a drunk or an alcoholic. There were a lot of these tags in there. So that showed us like already then that this data set as a benchmark, which is also used for image recognition, for example, could be very nastily biased in that regard. We also see that now with CLIP, this new image descripting model, which has pretty much now become a new standard of quality in terms of like being able to describe fluently the content of images, has a nasty tendency to be kind of racist at times already in its descriptions and quite negatively biased. So we see that even, with, for example, OpenAI, which, is quite a well-resourced research institution, they're still producing, models and using data sets that cause very problematic outcomes.
And is it something that we can prevent, or like, let's say there's the designer who would like to try to use AI or open source tools in their work and like has to do with this database, which was probably created by somebody else, including the human errors, and who have to take the responsibility, and how can we sort of have this literacy on consequences of the usage of these tools?
So, this is something I'd love Chris's point of view on too. I think personally, I think there's a lot of potential in exploring, in a sense, the boundaries of these tools and, sort of like attempting, I think as designers, for example, it's important to be very critical to what you scale up with, that if you build like one of these pre-trained models into like the core of what you're doing, to be very careful with how you really sort of dive into what the outputs can do in that regard. But I think more importantly it is, and also in the context of imagination in the future, I think it's very important to try and stretch and push and find the limits of what we can do now in terms of representation, and to work with, attempting to improve or expand or stretch those edges further, for example, by, fine-tuning models on more diverse representations in data, for example, or, opening these dialogues. I think that's very important, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's also, it's opening new discussion about what responsibility is in terms of machine learning, because who is responsible for those deep fakes? It's not the Ian Goodfellow who wrote the code itself, or is it someone who got the data set, or who? I think it's kind of creates this chain of people who are responsible, and those in the end who produce the work. What kind of work? Is it commercial? Is it for what purpose? I mean, it's a lot of different layers to this question, which is quite complicated. And I guess it's really also the responsibility of artist and designer who works with those systems to wisely choose what he works with. For example, with the ImageNet, I agree. I've also saw it recently because there've been a lot of images for containing faces of the people who didn't give their approval to be on those databases. So they kind of blurred it, so they updated it. So I think it's kind of moving maybe into the right direction, but I guess we're all just building up a new reality of those things, and we have to build the rules how to use that as well. This also touches a lot the questions of ethics. And for example, if you work with GANs, you can't really, you have very unpredictable results. So you can't, so the database use on that is not that important in terms of rights and in more than like computer recognition or like computer vision. So yeah, I mean, it really, I guess it personally touches different projects, and it depends on a project, but it's definitely a very important question. I mean, for sure. For example, if you collect your data set yourself, or the best way is to even produce the data set by yourself. That is like the most pure way, and no one ever can say anything to you, but it is complicated, of course. So maybe you can produce like 10, 20,000 of images yourself, but it is, yeah, it is hard.
It is.
Still, you cannot be fully aware of how much your own biases you're projecting in your homemade data set. So.
Exactly. I think that's why I personally find it very problematic with this idea of AI as somehow objective, because it is, separated from us. I think, like, at least as artists, I think it's especially important to own one's output, to, be responsible for that. And that doesn't mean that you can't, explore critically the difficult outputs, for example, pre-trained models. But I think it's very important to assume that responsibility, that conscious exploration of these things. And I think that the important thing is that we often consider these things as, finite or given, and especially in the context of, how difficult it is to, build a representative data set. I think that this isn't necessarily a task that can be achieved, not with any reasonable amount of energy, but at the same time, this doesn't mean that it isn't possible to A, strive for it, and also B, continuously try and make feedback loops that, can help us attempt to stay aware of the roles of these things, to not sort of adopt them, unconsciously and just use them because they're convenient.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's also sort of hard, but I think now it's becoming way more easier. Like to find the right sort of data set. I mean, I'm not from the AI or programming background, but you sort of have the Google images as the default, but now you have more and more just enthusiasts who would go into like Wild Island and just scan everything out of it. And then like it could be like input for creating like new 3D artworks, and just like being the volunteer providing your data for something that could be really, really valuable. Like if it's like outside of the context of the Google, which sort of does its pre-categorization and
yeah, I mean, there are also
revise
a lot of cultural institutions that have huge archives that are not even online out there, and they kind of, I know a few projects that they forcing artists to digitize their archives, and then these also can be very beautiful data sets, because all those physical, I mean, we have to understand that if we get the online data set from somewhere is just a digital image, but there have been so many beautiful images or objects, the physical ones that are not there, that can also become a part of your project, but of course they have to be digitized. But those sources and those museums also, they give access to all these things more and more. So yeah, I guess with more time we get more beautiful data sets. We just have to mention what we use, that there are a lot of people being involved into collecting that. So it's not you're the only one who collected millions of images. So it's also big work to do that.
Absolutely. And I think like this highlights something very importantly. I mean, personally, our focus, of course, is very much on the natural world and ecology and that realm of representation, which, is very weak in digital senses. And of course, the closest we get often to a more representative representation of the natural world is through the sciences, who are, the scientists who have been out there cataloging systematically for many years. And as you're saying, that's sort of finally starting to open up more. And I think this is also very positive, because I do worry sometimes that observationist, can be equivalent to colonization, especially in, vulnerable ecosystems. That's why I say, like, I'm not sure people should swim too much around a coral reef, as they have become so endangered. And I think like this is also what's really fun about being an artist, is that we can, take these troves of scientific data and work with their communication, because very often it's very hard to, navigate through a database, even if they're fantastic images. It's just the way scientific data often is formatted can be painful. But I think that also is sort of like really quite fascinating to work with, the storytelling of data, which is slowly being released, and especially with the scientists and collaboration in mind.
Because like storytelling of data processed by the AI can give you such like an unexpected results, which would sort of be beyond your norm and beyond the sort of human comfort zone. And yeah, that's the good thing about it. Yeah. I see we have a question from the audience. Do you feel like you have to agree with your AI collaborative machines? Does the AI represent you? Can you give it full responsibility as an autonomous collaborator? Or does it sometimes disagree or work against you?
I struggle a lot to think of AI or machine learning algorithms as autonomous in any way. I think like we definitely get results that we didn't expect, or that might not, have been the direction we were moving towards. But I think like it's very hard at least the way machine learning algorithms are nowadays, and the way you work with curating a data set of images, videos, sounds, 3D models, and so on. It's very hard to see this more than a tool. I think it's a very fascinating tool because of the way the process works, but I don't really recognize the idea of AI as a collaborator in that sense. I experience it a lot, personally at least, a lot more as a tool, which affords a kind of interesting feedback loop. It takes something, it distills it often down to some essential understandings or inferences from that data. For example, from images, it builds up, an understanding of the content of the data set, and then learns to, generate a representation of that data that is, hopefully good. And that, of course, becomes a very interesting process, because then you're met, with the essential or the essence of the data set you fed, which can be quite a sort of eye-opening experience. But I feel that's quite different from the idea of a collaborator in a more interactive sense in that way, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally agree with you. I think we also tend to a bit mystify and romanticize this tool. I mean, as we read in this sci-fi movies and we saw it, like it's not an entity yet, at least. It's just, I mean, if you ask a painter, does he collaborate with a pencil? I mean, it's not. I mean, it's just a tool, but it's just more complicated tool, I would say. It gives you more possibilities and more things that you might not do with just a computer or just with your physical tools. So at this stage, yeah, I also agree it's not a collaborator, but it's very complicated, unexpected tool you work with. But maybe in the future we might face this interesting collaborator, but we're not in that stage yet. Yeah,
I agree there. I think there is some potential for performance art to integrate machine learning, but that's, I think, a different topic.
Like it adds sort of performative layer to the practice. Like, let's say we take the painter like Kandinsky, who has like a big process like creating these artworks, and then if it's done by the AI, because it is technically very much possible now, that if you just feed the same artist to the algorithm, it will sort of spit out the same artworks, but then will it be the same, and who owns it, and what is the process of it?
Absolutely. I think like, especially like the idea of reproducing a visual subset, for example, taking the output of a famous artist and regenerating that, I think that of course opens up some rather interesting doors in terms of like the idea of origin. But often these are, you know, it's a very specific, limited subset of arts, which I think then again often sort of more is, you know, and there's a term for this, overfitting, when you have too small a data set and in the end it only learns to regurgitate exactly what it's been fed in, so you get results that are very similar to the outputs. And of course that, I think, opens some interesting headaches with derivative works, of course, but I think that's quite different from exploring for example, the sum of all paintings, which I think opens up some rather more interesting nuances and still the potential for new subjects and new compositions, for example, and new mixes of techniques in terms of output representation.
Yeah, I mean, I can also add that for myself, what I found very interesting working with machine learning tools, that it slightly changes the role of the artist. So the machine learning can produce an infinite amount of results, like millions of painting. And it's not about what it produces, but what does the artist choose from those million paintings. I mean, it can be tons of them, but only one can speak to you, or only one can tell a story or have feelings. So that is something that it's slightly different now to see what the artists do. It's not about the producing, but also a lot about choosing. And why do you choose that artwork, let's say, over the other millions of them?
Yeah, I think there was the generative artist Vera Molnar who has like a very good explanation of that in regards of randomness. And she explains like what the fantastic things about generative art and computers is randomness, the fact that you can generate thousands of outputs and, you know, be confronted with all these outputs and say like, this subset is what interests me, I want to focus more on that. So it's a way of also exploring yourself and you know, helping your own process and curation of self. I think that's also really quite fascinating. Also the AI artist Anna Ridler has compared like a lot of machine learning art to land art, in the sense that you're in a landscape, you know, you select a subset of data and then work with what that can produce, you know, as part of a process, which I also quite like as a way of looking at it.
Nice. I see we have a question from Soren, and I'm also very interested in that. Like, is there such thing as AI aesthetics in a way? And Soren writes that he's curious about the way that you both address how machine learning and AI pushes your aesthetic boundaries, like beautiful versus ugly jellyfish, the unimaginable. And how have you seen that your aesthetics are being challenged and evolved by using the AI? And could you name it maybe expanded aesthetics? And are you drawn to new directions to explore new topics with the help of AI?
Hi, Søren. I think like Aaron Hertzman quite recently published a paper, which Sophia loves to refer to, on visual indeterminacy indeterminacy in GAN arts. And one of the interesting things is this, in terms of, for example, GANs and outputs from GANs, you often have results that are, visually sort of indeterminate. They are, they at first glance, they resemble, for example, a cat, a dog, or, a scene, like you showed Chris, like this sort of composite scene at the same time that still had, some recognizable elements in it. And what's interesting is that visual indeterminacy holds within it the promise of, cohesion without it being cohesive. And I think that's always been really quite fascinating, because what we often see when working, with anything from GANs to texture synthesis, etc., is what we get is often some kind of essential qualities that capture an aesthetic essence, but without actually being exactly a reproduction. So you get jellyfish-ness, you get nature-ness. Without it, you can't really pinpoint where the nature starts and stops, where the jellyfish starts and stops. That this was what makes it a jellyfish, but it has the essential visual aesthetic to it. And that's been really quite fascinating, because when you start working with different essences and layers of essence, it becomes very, very interesting to see how, like, when you change the data that you put in, how does that essence shift? And it becomes this sort of interesting exploration, really, of like, what are the edges of that aesthetic, and when do they start bleeding into something else? When does jellyfishness become squidness, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because that's also what happens. Like, you can never, like, at a single page actually define everything. Like, I was trying, like, to pause the video of Chris, and like, you have a story about, like, I was seeing a dog, but then you actually don't see a dog. You see like half dog, half toothbrush.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it has definitely those dreamy psychedelic aesthetics in there. And because it's also technically, sometimes some algorithms are untrained or it's not enough data. So it's never the definitive thing. But it's also interesting if you think about Kafka's Metamorphosis, it has some kind of a same relationship with that. It's something also called in psychology, I forgot the term, when it's something familiar to you, but also unfamiliar at the same time. But your brain recognizes this thing, you just cannot name it. And those tiny thing about AI is quite fascinating. But yeah, I agree, it has a specific aesthetics. And if you see like all the GAN produced works, they have the same aesthetics. And in my work, I also sometimes try to escape that, because you can't really then see what is the personality of the artist if he just uses the GAN trained artwork. I mean, they all basically look the same. So then you have to be even more creative than yourself, try to find different ways how to show those GAN images a bit in a more interesting way than they just get from out of the algorithm. So then you can manually do something with them or bring it to another space or wherever. But it's also kind of a challenge for the artist to show this work, all those GANs produced work, in a different way.
Absolutely. I think, like, for example, the context of Big GAN, which you showed, which is trained on image nets, which, is a little slice of our reality made into a data set. And what I think about that is really quite fascinating about that is that you have like this dreamlike space wherein, you have a sort of like almost a subconscious representation of the mundane world we have in our sort of natural Western sphere of life often. And what I find interesting about that is because you have this dreamlike quality to it, this indeterminacy, it's also holds a lot of potential to, inject and try and expand upon that, as you're saying, to work with, for example, training new GANs on new data sets to try, or blending between them or adding layers to them to explore, to try and push that, because as we focus a lot on artificial life, and when you look at what natural life is represented online, it's actually quite a narrow sort of like narrow spectrum. There's not a lot of wildlife diversity, so you also have the issue of like, at what point are you generating specimens nobody can relate to because they have no personal sphere reference? So then what's been quite fascinating is to explore, okay, how can we take like iconic starting points and then start to expand them and pull them and diversify the representation in ways that sort of somehow bleeds in and back into the natural world again.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how it all sort of mediated through the senses of the human or the visitor or the one who experiences, like that you can think of the apophenia, connecting meaningless things in a meaningful story, and also pareidolia, which is like, yeah, through the visual stimulus, trying to find meaningful connections in the non-meaningless things, like seeing a man on the moon. And yeah, just like it really works well with AI. And I see we have another question. If you see the AI being some sort of the cultural phenomenon, or do you think that we might see the recognition of AI art as art medium in a broader sense and the audience, as it happened with photography, for example?
Definitely. I mean, it's already an AR art is a separate AI movement, I would say. It's something that it's very recognizable because it uses different tools. So it's already there. I mean, there are already a lot of beautiful AI artists, and this movement is there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I really like about sort of like the fact that AI art is becoming more recognized is also because it is a subset of generative arts. And what we've seen over the last few years now is that finally generative arts, which often have lived in a very difficult, purely digital space, have begun to sort of gain wider recognition and therefore also legitimacy, so to speak, which has been really encouraging to see, because the speed at which digital art and generative arts works has been often a lot more quick and reactive, and with a lot stronger small sub-communities and niches, which allow for, a lot more diverse exploration, not only of just like what's a specific, aesthetic or topic. There's been such a wide range there. So I think like the fact that AI art has also become more established, and I really hope it's not just a temporary fad, but that this is part of a larger, settling of the generative arts as, equal to the more traditional ones, because I think there is a lot within there in terms of artistic, expression that is really very valid and very important.
Yeah, I agree with you, Filikan. Like it's sort of deciding like how do you want to use the tool? Yeah, like just like out of this like relevancy and sort of freshness, or that you become so proficient in it that it becomes your tool just in your toolkit. Like for somebody it's a pencil, and then it's more applying this tool to the method and to what you want to explore and what conclusions you want to draw from your research to the maybe visual or audio output. So I don't think that it should be purely called just like an AI art, but more like AI as the way of exploring and finding certain conclusions.
Absolutely. And I think like a good parallel is the fact that smartphone cameras did not make everybody a great photographer. It's that mastery of the tool that's really important to sort of like develop bonds, and the storytelling. The stories we tell are very important. They are often, what makes a difference between just using anything and actually using something with the intent of telling a particular story or, narrative. I think that's quite important as well. Like, why are we using these tools? And for example, in the case of Beneath the Newer Waves, the reason for using machine learning was to precisely explore the fact that we at once want to, create artificial life and representations of nature or the more than human in the digital space in ways that aren't just, like pretty pictures on Instagram, nature photos. But at the same time, it was also because we were using machine learning to generate these specimens, we had to work within what data was available, which of course we had an educated hunch there wasn't a lot of data. So this became this sort of interesting kind of tug of war between exploring how we can, create interactions and representations of life in the digital space, but at the same time also working with the limits of what we have available of representation already, and that sort of like interesting dialogue there. So I think like the why we use these tools is also very important to sort of be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. Also, it's interesting, Felikan, that you mentioned that you also worked with Joel. I mean, it's so cool. I didn't know that, but it's so amazing. It's also built as some kind of a artistic community around AI that is so strong and is so amazing. Absolutely. Because everyone is open to collaborate and everyone work with like different sides of it. And it's just like from whom I met already, is just amazing people all over the world. And
Absolutely.
it's just so inspiring also to see that there are a lot of similar people going through amazing projects. It's just, it's great.
Absolutely,
I think.
yeah. It's been really nice to see, and it's also what I like now is that we've seen over the last couple of years now a slow maturation of a lot of these new tools where people and, well, artists have started to develop their own, you know, aesthetical expressions, their own use of these tools, which, you know, isn't just a GAN for the, you know, GAN aesthetics done, you know. We see a a lot of that still with, you know, the fact that this is still a very new and hyped up medium, but we're starting to see more mature, in-depth explorations, you know, everything from what Joel Simon is doing, you know, with genetic algorithms, to, for example, what Alex Mordenstev is doing with neural cellular automata, which is taking, you know, something quite familiar and very, you know, old school in the sense, and exploring it in a very new way that's very different. So I really like that we're now starting to see like this branching and diversification, single voices becoming stronger, which has been very nice to see.
Yeah.
I have a question to Lenka, if we have another 15 minutes.
Yes, definitely.
Because I tried to make a little prototype of some kind of poll that we can try to make. It's something in between, like combining open questions to map some sort of potential future and the desired and non-desired outcome. And because it's online, I tried using Mentimeter for the first time. So I hope it's gonna work. But I'm going to share my screen now. So let's see. So you can go to the website, which is called menti.com. It's for making online polls and questionnaires. And when you're there, you can join by filling the code, which is written here. So it's 8704-1804. And then you're supposed to see the presentation. So with this, trying to prototype this world building, and I used for the first time, like I started with more traditional ways of how maybe big corporations or governments explore and prototype potential tendencies and their risks. And in the beginning, it's maybe creating this binary system, but once we have this binary system, we can break it. So first, I want to ask you to think about some kind of subjects or tendencies or trends which you think can be important for the society in the future, let's say in 10 years ahead. And that could be any kind of subject like biodiversity, inclusivity, artificial intelligence. So I'm going to start the poll. And yeah, we have some time to think, so. I do see we have equal access to healthcare, really big, and also explainability, inclusivity. Remote work, decoloniality. I wonder if in the chat somebody can write maybe things they want to choose, and then we can proceed further with them. Because now, like this, what's going to happen with the word cloud? If some things were going to be named twice, they're going to be bigger. So you kind of have like the voting system in a very organic way. But I see now we have like AI twice, decoloniality, inclusivity, and equality, and diversity, more equality.
Ability to breathe is so dystopian.
In 10 years, just think of it. What do you think, Chris and Filican? What should we choose?
I mean, I'm always going to be sort of biased towards anything that, you know, opens, you know, for greater diversity and equality. I mean, I think that's, you know, especially with a lot of the problems we face, is we need to sort of nurture, you know, diversity, but also empathy for others. If, you know, we can't have an empathic, compassionate interaction, you know, between humans, how on earth can we manage that, you know, to an insect or a tree or something, you know, completely alien to ourselves? So I think it's really quite crucial that, you know, we focus on these kind of aspects, you know, attempting to sort of engage with our better selves there.
Yeah, I agree. It's also like sort of exploring more like human values and not focusing on the technology, because it will come as a tool and be with us, whatever. And yeah, diversity and equality is really something at stake and something that should be challenged, I feel like. So let's say, yeah, because there are quite a lot of votes on inclusivity and diversity, we remember this word in our heads, and we proceed further. Like, how can we extrapolate it and take it to the extremes? Like, what would be the worst and the best case scenario? Like, if we are able to achieve like a very inclusive state, or a state where it have not worked. And yeah, so let's say we talk about now about the embraced and the most valued outcome. What would be this outcome? Like,
Could you maybe repeat which words?
Diversity and inclusivity, and empathy. So we have a life in this thriving, pluralistic reality with a lot of happiness, I see, and deep curiosity and no polarization, empathic interfaces, and the death of fascism, of course.
I mean, I think tolerant coexistence is, I mean, one of the most outspoken to me here. I mean, this is basically what we are all thriving to. And that would be the best case scenario, because others sounds a bit too utopian, maybe not non-achievable, but that one is something that we definitely can do as a society together.
Absolutely.
And I see also growth and regeneration. It's quite interesting because then in a way we can rebuild the society, the ecosystems, and the ecological state of the planet, which is now at stake.
Absolutely.
And non-surveilling text, because indeed then it excludes from the list algorithmic bias, which are now still happen to be present, unfortunately. And I think here, there are some like, a lot of trends about, like conscious entanglement. And in a way, we can drive a conclusion it will make us more conscious and collectively coexisting and empathic.
I think also it's important to consider that we shouldn't aim for perfection. I think like reality is, messy, overlapping, self-contradicting. And I think that it's very important when we sort of look to the future that we don't try to find a solution, because there is no silver bullet that would ever manage to encompass, the complexities of our world. So it's going to be very important to, embrace the multitude of solutions, the multitude of small actions and big actions that together, can move messily in one direction. I think because we tend to often, like to somehow distill things down to a simple, bite-sized answer. And I don't think that's really possible. I think we have to accept that, we're going to be messy, that our algorithms are never going to be bias-free. And that's fine. That's just part of who we are, but we can still make something good, and better and growing out of that. I think that's also just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and being conscious, maybe just one step at a time, because indeed, like you said, like if we aim for such like almost like utopian idealistic visions, there would always be like something at stake, and there would always be a price to be paid. And somehow it always happens, at least in the sci-fi movies, that the utopia ends up to be not that pleasant, because there's always like this little bubble which excludes the rest. So indeed, it's good to think, what do we hope to achieve, and what sort of sacrifices can we make, and for whom not. So the other thing I want to look at is that what if this inclusivity, equality, and ethics have not been achieved? What society we might end up in, or what values will be prominent in the worst case scenario. I'm going to switch to a different Mentimeter because I made 2 trial versions. Just a second. And you would need to register by using this code. So it's the same website, menti.com. But with a different code. It's 63968077. And so here you can fill potential answers, or just points for the non-desired outcome. We have business unusual and the status quo. It's funny that the non-desired outcome is basically the status quo in a way, and the lack of dialogue.
Yeah, I think like things are bad enough already, and I think if we don't address that, then of course, you know, we're not moving in a very great direction. So I think that's we have to avoid monocultures if we are to have a hope of improvement, and I think that's, you know, quite critical as well to explore and encourage, you know, for our work to try and explore, you know, our voice and try and like add to a multiplicity of voices that, you know, all have their own different tones and formulations, because that, you know, encourages us to sort of, hopefully encourages us to look away from the purely monotonous and familiar.
Totally, yeah. And also, yeah, like that in a way it's both like, yeah, being 2021, but also like if it just continues to not change, that's ecological collapse. And yeah, polarization, total resource depletion, war. And it's nice to also think like what is exactly non-desirable about it. Like if we're talking about polarization or the status quo, like why is it bad? Like, yeah, because obviously everybody's fed up that if things continue this way. And yeah, what are the values behind that? And what do we hope to achieve? And what would be the sacrifice? And maybe who would benefit if that's the worst case scenario? And the last one is about mapping the context, and can we choose the domain in which these areas are taking the impact or effect? So who and what will be affected if we're talking about, yeah, like the importance of inclusivity and empathy for the future? The domains can be healthcare, agriculture, supermarkets, minorities, culture. So here you can propose your own domains to which we can apply the topic. So yeah, here we start having another word map, and we can just by our thinking apply like what would it mean for heterogeneous, what would it mean for heterocultural, yeah, for the societal narratives or for the healthcare. And then basically we can extrapolate it more and more, like what would it mean for a particular domain. And I think it would be really interesting to know what would inclusivity mean for microbes.
Yeah, or fungi.
Maybe there would be some sort of coexistence.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for exploring how can we create positive feedback loops, not just with ourselves, but with others too. For example, fungi. I think that's sort of like exploring what are positive mutual outcomes. And of course, you can't have equally positive mutual outcomes with all microbes without there being, well, back to the utopian problem. But I think that it's still, thinking in that context allows us to have different base values of qualifying what's a good or a bad, proposal in that sense.
Yeah, and also like it reminds me about this sort of psychological exercise called the empathy circle. It was practiced, just by some writers, psychologists, and artists somewhere in Germany, like 100 years ago. And their exercise was like in imagining this like circle of empathy and trying to see how you would feel like if you would be a rock, I would be a fungi, and then we would try to have like a dialogue and a conversation. And indeed, like it's really important to think like how big is this circle and how broad can we make it, because by definition, maybe in this world as we know it, there is a human in the center of existence, and the rest is mostly excluded. Yeah, well, maybe there are dogs and cats as pets, but then the rest is affected more because it exists outside of the circle. But then you also cannot put too much inside of the circle, because then you have the fungi, the microbes, and then they can affect the human or create a disease. So it's like this really intricate balance, like where should we draw this line and how can we make it bigger, and who should be in the center of this circle, maybe, because like so far it was only like human centered, and you have like human centered design.
But maybe it shouldn't be centered. Maybe it can be decentralized, and multiple entities can have the same value. Maybe we can switch the system completely and go away from a human-centered world.
I agree there.
Yeah. And do you think it could be achieved with maybe like algorithms in a sense? Because like you have these proposals of decentralized governments and decentralized societies, then it already sort of leaves it more to people in a sense.
Personally, I think like most algorithms are in some weird way a mirror of our reality. And I think that we can't rely on any algorithm to enforce something that isn't, represented already in society in terms of values and structures and the ways we treat, one another and non-societal entities. So I think, of course, algorithms can help, reinforce the feedback loops we have, but I think we need to still start with ourselves before we can, hope for any algorithm to fix anything,
Yeah, completely. I mean, we have to remember that technology is not neutral, and it can't be. So it's really important about who creates the algorithms and who rules that and how does it navigate. Yeah, it's never neutral, at least at this point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we're sort of done here, Lenka. If people have questions, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen.
Okay, so you can ask questions either in the Zoom or on our Discord. I'm checking both places. Actually, I'm checking also YouTube live stream. So, yeah. But maybe before they appear, maybe just like you can try to wrap it up with maybe answering the question. So like, can, according to you, AI help us in this, like either envisioning better future or even like building it for ourselves? Because a lot of things were mentioned, and now we know that also this technology is not like some kind of a superpower. It really heavily depends on our human nature. So is this like some kind of like techno-optimism, or is there, according to you and from your personal position, some kind of a hope?
Personally, I think there's always hope. I try not to use technology for the sake of technology, oddly enough, but I think that it's very important to, have an intention beyond the tool. And I think that sort of if it's a pencil or a machine learning algorithm, it doesn't really matter. There's always hope, but it's up to you to actually, to seize that hope and that potential and actually try and manifest that again.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I usually try to envision that as a hammer. I mean, you can kill a person with a hammer, but you can also build a house. The same goes for technology. It can go both ways, and it's our decision where we would go.
I agree, and like as long as we can sort of increase our literacy in the technology and just be more aware of it, we can gain more agency to use it as a tool rather than just believe in techno-optimism and that it would sort of solve it by itself, because indeed like there are humans and visions behind it, and whatever visions there are and what are the values in its core, it's going to affect the outcome of any kind of technology or tool or a hammer, like Chris said.
Yeah. So we can all like engage in a critical but creative practice with this tool.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is one question on YouTube chat. Do you think AI can ever actually imagine something new, or will it always simply create averages of what information we put into it?
I mean, it's also the question, what is new in terms of AI? I mean, it produces the new content, but of course it's based on what you've seen already. So it's a kind of I don't know if the people can also produce something new, because we also, as artists, we see a lot of things, and it's sort of a reflection of what we saw of our environment, of a lot of different things. So, I mean, what I can say, the AI can show you a new ways of envisioning things, of something that was not there before, but it's not something out of blue, something completely new that never been there, because already it's something that is trained on some data sets. So it's something new and not at the same time.
Yeah, but maybe sometimes accidentally, thanks to some kind of error in training.
You can, exactly. It's what I had. Yeah,
get so unexpected result, and then it's actually bringing you to something new. And maybe it's also about like what kind of meaning we make out of those outputs from AI. Like like you can see something that's actually just an average of what AI was trained on, but then it can like spark some inspiration in your head, like we were talking about. What was the term? Apophenia.
Yeah.
So
yeah, indeed. It's also like maybe in the eyes of beholder, because maybe for AI it's something ordinary and just the basic construction of like certain logical chains, but for the human it would be something unique, or like the opposite, like for the AI it would be an achievement to just make spontaneous decision. But yeah, like we make them, and at the same time we don't make it, because like nobody speaks their own language, nobody uses their own software, which is not completely true, of course. Some people do, but there are like some boundaries to that.
Yeah, totally.
There is even a reply on this question. Thank you. It's a good point, and sometimes it can find patterns that we cannot. I have heard about this in healthcare, detecting cancers. They're training AI to look at X-rays, MRIs, etc.
Yeah, that I find super fascinating because the traditional evidence-based medicine, like it only grasps certain things to a certain way. I mean, like there are still so many diseases which people don't even know why they come from, and like it takes like pretty long to make a vaccine or to make a medication, and if that could be outsourced by AI, like still the human is the curator and the tester. But even talking like there's one perfumer, Baruti, who also so it is like Spiros Drosopoulos, and he made the perfume for the exhibition, and he's now working also with like all sort of like algorithm and seeing like if he can create a perfume which is imagined by an algorithm, but then of course he chooses the smells.
Yeah.
So if it can be applied to like pretty broad sense and not just like to monitor the data or.
It's so interesting. I want to smell that. I mean, the machinery smell what it is. It's insane. It's insane if the digital things can have smell. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, me too. And maybe can you tell us about this exhibition project? Whether it was going to have some extension or like, because I don't know, like the exhibition is now is still open or closed?
Yeah, it's still open. Sort of the openings times are moving because of the lockdown regulations. So there is a hope that we're gonna be opened to the public for a few days. So now it's officially closing on the 13th of May. So everybody can still visit it online, and that's a bit unfortunate because we worked really hard to build the physical space. But a lot of conclusions have been drawn, and a lot of great collaborations have happened, and like artists are sort of like starting to contact each other, and that's like a great thing that can happen. And I think it's definitely going to continue in some way, and just like thinking about the outcomes that were made through the process of creating it and envisioning, because it sort of looked at these three different ways, the healing process, so to say, that you maybe start in denial and in optimism, and then you end up in the crisis point, and then you sort of get born anew in a new state. I can share some links as well for people if they want to see it.
Because you guys, you've made such an amazing VR room, and it's just like it's virtual space exists out there. I mean, it can exist forever and like hosting different exhibitions. So it's just amazing you've built that so you can, I think it can live for longer than just one exhibition.
I think this is great because otherwise, like, I wouldn't be able to visit this exhibition. And now, because it's a new normal exhibition situation, like building virtual experiences, then also people who are limited with the situation and cannot travel can access these ideas that are shared and spread via these exhibitions.
Yeah,
so great.
Yeah, totally. It was interesting to see how to translate it in this sort of the physical experience into the digital, and in the end, like something new sort of arise. So like the virtual space was built by Noemi Biro and Luisa Teichmann, and we sort of, together with the input of artists, created this sort of futuristic version of the Mama showroom. So like if you go there, it's like completely taken over by seaweed, algae, and water and desert, and you keep on wandering and untangle the artist's works in a very sort of unusual scenography. And it also offers more possibilities to explore the project in that way. just to being an online catalog only.
Yeah. Nice. Well, thank you. Was really inspiring session, and I think now, you share the link to the exhibition. I will also share it on Discord, and people can also access it from our website, from the event page of this event. I guess we will have to wrap it up. So I will again thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And I'm really looking forward to expand on some of the things that were said today in the panel discussion, where Chris will be discussing with other panelists. And this will be on Friday, the 14th of May at 6 o'clock.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It was very inspiring and such a great talk. Super nice. Yeah.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, and I super enjoyed it. And can't wait to explore other parts of the program.
Yes. Yes. Good luck with all the festival.
Yeah. Thank you.